Joining me today from his home in Nambe, New Mexico, Congressman Ben Ray Lujan is joining us via Zoom. Mr. Lujan, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Scott. It's good to be with you.
Good to see you again, and thanks for being here. Wanted to ask you a bit about some pieces of legislation that you are sponsoring in Congress this week. One of them is the Protecting Indian Tribes from Scams Act. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Most certainly, Scott. So this complements another piece of legislation that I've worked with my colleagues on, which is to stop COVID scams. Now that families and individuals have been preyed upon by bad people, trying to scam them out of money, get them to sign up for programs that are not real, selling them PPE, that protective equipment like face coverings or rubber gloves or protective gear that is not safe, that has not been approved for sale, or just scamming people out of their information, pretending to be from the IRS, from Social Security Administration, or even selling Medicare products that are not real. So the idea here is how can we work closely with one another, understanding how families have been targeted, especially our brothers and sisters in Native American communities and tribal communities with the Pueblos, to make sure that there would be efforts to stop this and to prevent and pursue scammers as well. So it's an important piece of legislation. It would work with the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to be able to impose these penalties and go after brothers and sisters. It would also require a study to be conducted to report back all of the deceptive programs, acts, and practices that are being used to target tribal members or tribal governments.
I see. And this is getting some bipartisan support as well. It's not just from your side of the aisle, it's some folks from the other side too, correct?
Most certainly. So I was proud to partner with some of my Republican colleagues, namely the lead author on the Republican side is from Oklahoma. And the idea here is we have seen this firsthand. We're hearing it from constituents. We're hearing it from tribal leaders, from Pueblo leaders that we all represent across the country. And so it's another area where we're coming together with a bipartisan effort to put legislative initiatives forward to increase those penalties, but to better understand where those scammers are coming from, what they're doing, and that way we can put a stop to it. And again, partnering together, Democrats and Republicans, to make sure we're protecting our constituents.
Very good. And so talk to me a little bit about the chances for this to pass. Do you think it'll get to the floor?
So this next month in September, there are some committee hearings scheduled, namely in the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I proudly sit on, and which this is going to be heard.
Okay.
And so we're hoping that we can get this legislation included in any vehicles that may be moving. So, sometimes, Scott, pieces of legislation, they won't pass as a standalone piece of legislation, but you work with other colleagues, they put bills together, and then you move a package forward. So it may not be signed under my name, but we're hopeful that whatever packages we can get moving, we'll get this moving with. And I think I misspoke, Scott. This legislation, I confused it with the Tribal Connect Act. So this piece of legislation, I partnered with one of my Republican colleagues out of Montana on the Tribal Connect Act, which I think we'll talk about in a moment. That's where I partnered with one of my Republican colleagues out of Oklahoma.
Okay. Very good. And that is something I wanted to ask you about, too, because that's another piece about internet connectivity and things like that on Native American lands that you are working with. And, in fact, you worked with this along with your colleague in the Senate, Senator Heinrich.
That's correct. So this is an example of a piece of legislation that we've worked with colleagues from the other side of the aisle in the House, a Democrat, Republican, and also worked on bicamerally with Senator Heinrich and the partners that he has in the U.S. Senate. And the idea here is simple. Provide the support necessary to close the broadband gap, the connectivity gap in tribal communities across the United States. And these investments would benefit us right here in New Mexico. The legislation also goes further. It looks at existing programs that some tribal communities and Pueblo communities don't currently qualify for because they exclude them. And what I mean by that, Scott, there's a program today called E-Rate. It's an initiative, the E stands for education, to connect schools and public libraries with the fastest speeds, with fiber to the curb. Well, the program excludes connecting important gathering places and learning places like chapter houses on the Navajo Nation, or allowing for there to be partnerships with Dene College or with Navajo Tech University. And so the legislation also qualifies those facilities working down into the community level, which would also allow them to be connected. There's a $100 million initiative behind this to help close that gap. And it complements another piece of legislation that we in the U.S. House of Representatives have already passed, which was an infrastructure package, the Moving Forward Act, which also includes resources to close that connectivity gap in rural and tribal communities, something that I've been working on and that I'm very proud of. The first piece of legislation we're hoping to pass out of the House of Representatives, which is the Tribal Connect Act, and pass out of the Senate. The second piece of legislation I shared with you, Scott, the Moving Forward Act, that's already passed out of the U.S. House of Representatives. It's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. And this is even another example where President Trump asked for an infrastructure package. The U.S. House of Representatives, we passed an infrastructure package. Mitch McConnell's holding them up. And so I'm hoping that he'll see through all of his opposition to this and let that bill be voted on the Senate floor.
I see. Well, thank you for that. And I guess, what we've learned, I think, during all this pandemic and from folks trying to work from home and maybe go to school from home is the lack of connectivity we have in a large part of our state, a large part of your district, Congressman, as you certainly understand that. And the Navajo Reservation is one place among many that could really use some help in this regard.
Most certainly, Scott. We all know the difference between fast internet, slow internet, and no internet. Even with our mobile phones, for all of us that have some mobile phone devices that we depend on every day, we know where they work and where they don't work, and that's not right. As a matter of fact, Scott, you and I spoke about fixing the Amber Alert system after we lost young Ashlyn Mike. And it's important that there's broadband connectivity to make sure that when there's an Amber Alert that people are going to hear it and see it, and that we can keep people safe. It's going to save lives. And especially now with distance education. So whether students are in-person learning in the classroom or they're doing it distance learning, they all depend on the internet for their homework and their assignments. Also with telemedicine, with the expansion of offering services to make sure we're looking after loved ones, the expansion of mental behavioral health coverage now by using broadband connectivity and the internet to keep people connected. It matters. And then also for small businesses and just keeping people connected. So for so many reasons, this has to be addressed, and there has to be meaningful investment to close these gaps wherever they exist, including right here in New Mexico.
Very good. Well, Congressman, this is a job that you have had, of course, and but it's a job that you're maybe looking at giving up because you're running for another job, and that is a job in the U.S. Senate. I want to ask you a little bit about your campaign for Senate. How's it going?
Well, it feels positive, Scott. It's really tough during COVID to make sure that you're able to stay in touch with everyone, but we're using every tool at our disposal. I've been really encouraged by voters across every corner of New Mexico whose support I've been honored to earn, and that are helping us out with phone calls. They're writing postcards. They're reaching out to friends in every way that they can, encouraging them to have a plan to vote and to vote. And so, it's going to be upon us soon. My gosh, I think the election is less than 2 months away now, when early voting begins in just about a month,
right?
In the month of October. But nonetheless, it feels positive. The data shows that we've been able to earn support for every corner of New Mexico, and people have been so generous with us. It's been fun to be able to help tell, my story about growing up in New Mexico. I'm proud to be born and raised here. I still live on that little farm that I was born and raised on, where we grew up raising sheep and chickens and a couple cows, even a milking goat that one of my dad was convinced when one of his doctors told him goat's milk would help him with his belly. My dad didn't find someone that sold goat's milk. He found a milking goat. And I'll let you guess who was responsible for milking that goat growing up. So sharing that shared experience, understanding that on a small farm, no job is too big or too small, and that you understand the value of hard work. It's all of those values that I've taken with me serving the people of New Mexico, and that I hope to earn everyone's support to serve in the U.S. Senate.
Very good. Well, Congressman, let me ask you just one final question, and that your opponent is kind of wondering about debates and debate schedules. I know you two are scheduled to debate each other at least once. I think he would like a bit more. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, we're scheduled to debate twice. So,
Twice, pardon me.
There's one debate that's been scheduled with KOAT, who partnered with the largest paper in New Mexico, the Albuquerque Journal. And then there's another debate, which I called for, which is a statewide debate that PBS has partnered with some of their affiliates so that everyone across New Mexico could make sure that they were able to tune in as well. And so we're working to make sure we're making ourselves available, even with our roundtables, Scott. So the roundtables that I'm doing on the campaign side, people like press and others have been invited to participate. And so we want to make sure that we're reaching out to voters in every form that we can and having that important conversation. So I'm very proud that the people across New Mexico will be able to hear us with the importance of those debates that have been scheduled.
All right, fair enough. Very good. Ben Ray Lujan, thank you very much for joining me this morning. I appreciate it. I will note to our viewers and listeners, we did reach out to your opponent to invite him to appear this morning as well, but we so far have not heard back, but we'll keep trying. So thank you very much for talking with me today. I appreciate it.
Always an honor, sir, and to all of your listeners as well, Scott, just stay safe out there, do everything we can to stop the spread of COVID, and with the election upon us, please do everything you can to have a plan in place to make sure that you're going to vote. And the last thing I would say, Scott, is if you haven't filled out the census, please respond to the census. There's money that is going to be left on the table that would help us in New Mexico for education programs, seniors, investments with infrastructure. So please fill out that census if you haven't already.
Very good points, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Congressman. Take care.
Take care. All my best.
Thank you. Ben Ray Lujan, my guest here on KSJE.